That old fool has completely lost his mind.
For 21 years, the town of Pine Hollow ruthlessly mocked the old black farmer. They laughed in the local diner while pouring cheap coffee. They whispered behind their hands in the church pews on Sunday mornings. They laughed because he had done something they considered to be completely and utterly insane. He had sold his most prized, most valuable Angus bull just to save a homeless, starving teenager he had never even met. That mockery continued today, echoing across the dead, cracked fields as the county bank representative slammed the final heavy foreclosure notice onto his rotting wooden porch. Walter Hayes was about to lose his ancestral farm, his grandfather's legacy, while his neighbors laughed once again. But before the bank could lock his heavy oak doors forever, a deafening mechanical roar shook the Georgia dirt. 30 heavy-duty service trucks violently blockaded the rural highway. And the man leading the massive, intimidating convoy was no longer a starving, homeless teenager. 21 years ago, the dirt roads of Pine Hollow, Georgia, didn't offer many second chances. The red clay was unforgiving, baking into a hard, cracked shell under the relentless southern sun. If you fell down out here, you stayed down. And in the brutally hot summer of 2005, Walter Hayes was already stumbling. At 62 years old, Walter was fighting a losing, desperate battle against the soil. His grandfather had cleared that exact plot of land with nothing but a stubborn mule and a rusted hand plow, shedding literal blood and sweat into the dirt to build a legacy for his family. But history, no matter how proud or deep-rooted, didn't pay the mortgage. The First National Bank had just sent their very first warning letter. The print was stark black against the cheap white paper, a quiet, calculated threat sitting ominously on his scratched kitchen table. Outside his window, his crops were burning under a relentless, merciless August sun. The corn stalks were brown and brittle, snapping like dry twigs in the hot wind. The well was running dangerously low, coughing up muddy water that tasted of iron and defeat. The only real liquid asset Walter had left to his name was a massive purebred Angus bull. The bull weighed exactly 1,800 pounds, pure rippling muscle. Its coat was as black as a moonless night, shining with prime health and raw power. That animal wasn't just livestock. He was an insurance policy, an emergency fund, breathing out in the pasture. The only thing standing between Walter's family and total, devastating foreclosure. Then came a Tuesday afternoon that changed the trajectory of two lives forever. Walter had driven his rusty, rattling Ford pickup truck into town to buy a few bags of discounted feed. The truck's engine knocked and sputtered, a constant reminder of how close he was to the edge. He parked behind a rundown, oil-stained mechanic shop right next to the rusting carcass of an old Chevy pickup that had been stripped for parts. As he stepped out, his heavy work boots crunching on the loose gravel, he heard something. It wasn't the familiar clank of heavy wrenches or the sharp hiss of a pneumatic air compressor. It was a hollow, desperate sound, the metallic scraping thud of a garbage can being violently overturned. He walked around the hot brick corner and stopped cold. An 18-year-old kid was digging frantically through a grease-stained, fly-infested dumpster. His name was Ethan. He was a runaway, his skin stretched so tight over his prominent ribs that he looked like a walking skeleton. His jeans were torn at the knees, held together by nothing but rusty safety pins. And he wore heavy work boots wrapped aggressively in silver duct tape just to keep the worn-out soles from falling off completely. His fingernails were packed with thick black engine grease that looked like it had been there for weeks. The smell of damp mud, burnt clutch fluid, and spoiled food hung heavy and suffocating in the humid summer air. Ethan was tearing open a discarded fast food wrapper, desperately searching for half-eaten scraps, licking the grease from the paper like a starving animal. Before Walter could say a single word, the shop owner kicked open the heavy steel back door. It slammed against the brick wall with a violent clang that echoed down the alleyway. The man stepped out holding a heavy, solid iron lug wrench. His face was twisted in pure, unadulterated disgust. He didn't yell. He didn't warn the boy. He just swung his heavy steel-toed work boot, kicking the starving teenager square in the ribs with sickening force. Ethan hit the loose gravel hard, sending up a cloud of red dust. He didn't cry out. He didn't fight back. He had been beaten down so many times by the world that physical pain was just a daily routine. He just curled up into a tight defensive ball, gasping for breath, clutching a half-eaten sandwich to his chest like it was a brick of solid gold. The shop owner spat a dark stream of chewing tobacco onto the dirt right next to Ethan's face. "Get out of my trash, you worthless stray. Come around my shop again, and I'll break your jaw with this wrench. Nobody wants a thieving rat digging around their property." Walter stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching loudly on the gravel. The shop owner looked up, saw the towering, broad-shouldered frame of the old farmer, and decided it wasn't worth the trouble. He turned around, muttered a curse under his breath, and went back inside, slamming the heavy steel door shut behind him. Walter reached down and pulled the trembling kid up by his frayed, dirt-stained collar. Ethan flinched, shutting his eyes tight, raising his frail arms to block what he assumed would be another vicious, unforgiving blow. Instead, Walter simply dusted the dirt off the boy's sharp, bony shoulders. Walter reached into his worn denim pocket and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill. He held it out. It was a simple act of pity from an old man who didn't have much left to give. But Ethan didn't take it. The starving teenager wiped a streak of bright red blood from his split lip. He stared at the cash, his jaw clenching tight, and slowly shook his head. He looked past Walter, his intense, desperate eyes locking onto the rusty Ford truck idling roughly in the lot. "Your engine's running, Rich," Ethan rasped, his voice raw, shaking with adrenaline and deep, aching hunger. "Carburetor is choked with carbon. Give me a half-inch wrench. I'll fix it in 5 minutes. Just pay me enough for a fresh sandwich." Walter froze. As he stared at the Boya Euro, the thick ingrained grease under his fingernails, the fierce unbreakable pride burning in his exhausted sunken eyes, a Euro. He didn't see a stranger anymore. He saw a ghost. 15 years ago, Walter had a son named James. James had the exact same grease-stained hands, the same raw, intuitive mechanical gift, and the exact same stubborn, infuriating pride as the boy standing in front of him. But James had fallen in with the wrong crowd. He had made mistakes. He had lost his way. When James came home on a freezing, bitter cold November night, asking for a $5,000 loan to open a small auto shop and turn his life around, Walter had flatly refused. Full of rigid, unyielding farmer's pride, Walter didn't believe a troubled kid could change overnight. He refused to sell his livestock to invest in his son's dream, claiming that tough love would teach the boy a lesson about responsibility and hard work. Instead, the harsh rejection broke James entirely. Feeling utterly abandoned by his own father, feeling like he was beyond redemption, James ran away. 3 months later, on a freezing Tuesday morning, the Chicago police found his lifeless body under a snow-covered overpass. James had frozen to death in the -10-degree weather. When the county coroner examined the body, they found that James's fingers, black and necrotic from severe frostbite, were still clutching 2 things: a rusted half-inch wrench and a crumpled Greyhound bus schedule to Georgia. He had been trying to work his way back home, trying to prove his father wrong, but Walter's lack of faith had locked that door forever. For 15 years, that guilt had eaten Walter alive, gnawing at his soul every single time he looked at his empty fields or sat in his silent kitchen. He had saved his farm, he had kept his money, but his rigid pride had killed his own flesh and blood. Now, looking at this starving teenager who wanted to fix a carburetor just to earn a simple sandwich, Walter saw James. He saw the exact same untamed talent, the exact same fierce, desperate pride. Walter slowly put the $10 bill back into his pocket. He didn't hand the kid a wrench. He looked at the bank warning letter sitting on the cracked dashboard of his truck. He knew exactly what he was about to do. This time, he wouldn't let his pride destroy a boy's future. He was going to invest in this kid, and he knew with absolute certainty that it was financial suicide. The very next morning, before the sun even cleared the horizon, Walter backed his heavy livestock trailer up to the wooden loading chute. He loaded his prized Angus bull. The massive animal huffed its heavy hooves, thudding loudly against the metal floor. The entire town watched in sheer confusion as Walter drove straight past the local feed store, past the bank, and headed directly to the county livestock auction. He didn't negotiate. He didn't hesitate. He walked into the crowded, noisy auction house and sold his family's ultimate safety net to the highest bidder for exactly $5,000 in cold, hard cash. The neighbors whispered. Jeb, a local farmer who had always coveted Walter's prime acreage, leaned against his white wooden fence and laughed out loud, spitting a sunflower seed shell onto the grass. Old fool just sold his only lifeline for a street rat. He'll be bankrupt by winter and I'll buy his land for pennies on the dollar. But Walter ignored the mocking laughter. He took that thick stack of cash and drove straight to the state technical college in the next county. He walked into the sterile, air-conditioned admissions office, his heavy boots leaving flakes of dry mud on the polished linoleum floor. The receptionist looked at him with disdain, but Walter just slapped the money down on the front counter. He paid for a 2-year heavy-duty diesel mechanic certification program in full, under Ethan's name. He traded his family's legacy for a street kid's future. But what he didn't know was just how much that monumental decision would ultimately cost him. 3 days later, a silver Greyhound bus idled at the local station, its air brakes hissing loudly. Thick black diesel exhaust choked the morning air, smelling of burnt oil and new beginnings. Ethan stood nervously by the folding doors. He held a small canvas duffel bag in one hand containing everything he owned in the world, 2 changes of clothes and a set of cheap wrenches. In his other hand, he gripped a wrinkled $50 bill. It was the absolute last bit of pocket money Walter could spare. The kid's rough hands were trembling. The immense, crushing weight of what this old man had done was finally hitting him. He wasn't used to kindness. He was used to getting kicked. He looked at Walter, his voice cracking barely above a whisper. "Why? You don't even know me. Now you ain't got nothing left." Walter didn't have a grand emotional speech prepared. He was a man of the dirt, not a man of words. He just adjusted his faded baseball cap, looked down at the hot asphalt, and remained silent. But Evelyn, Walter's wife, stepped forward. She didn't offer a dramatic hug. She didn't wipe his tears. She just reached out and took Ethan's grease-stained hand. She squeezed it tight, her grip surprisingly strong for an old woman. Her voice was steady, carrying the quiet, unshakable wisdom of a woman who had weathered 1,000 storms and survived every single one. "Listen to me, son," she said, looking right into his terrified, desperate eyes. "The greatest harvest isn't what you pull from the dirt. It's the seeds you plant in someone else. Now get on that bus and make it grow." Ethan swallowed hard, fighting back a massive surge of emotion he hadn't felt in years. He looked down at the $50 bill in his palm. He folded it carefully in half, then into quarters. He shoved it deep into the chest pocket of his worn-out jacket right over his heart. He didn't say thank you. He didn't make any grand, empty promises. He just gave one sharp, determined nod, turned around, and stepped onto the bus. As the Greyhound pulled away, disappearing down the long, shimmering highway, Walter and Evelyn stood alone in the swirling dust. They had just given away their very last layer of security. The clock was officially ticking on their farm. It was just a wrinkled $50 bill. But for Ethan, it was a blood oath. And he would spend the next 20 years preparing to honor it. 10 years later, the Georgia dirt proved just how unforgiving and cruel it could be to those who had nothing left to bargain with. By 2015, the Hayes farm wasn't just struggling. It was slowly, painfully bleeding out drop by agonizing drop. Without the massive Angus bull, Walter had absolutely no financial safety net. One bad harvest led directly and inevitably to another. The weather turned against them. A brutal, unprecedented 3-year drought hit the county hard. The sprawling, vibrant green pastures of his grandfather's era Euro, once the absolute envy of Pine Hollow Euro, had baked into cracked, barren mud that looked like shattered pottery. The white paint on the old farmhouse was peeling away like dead skin in the blistering sun, revealing rotting termite-eaten wood underneath. Every time the wind blew, the house groaned, sounding like a dying animal. Walter was now 72 years old. His body was a living, breathing map of relentless hard labor. His back was permanently hunched from decades of lifting heavy hay bales, and his knuckles were swollen tight with severe arthritis, making it agonizing just to hold a cup of morning coffee. It was a blistering Tuesday afternoon in mid-August. The temperature was hovering at 104 degrees in the shade. Walter sat in the sweltering, suffocating heat on the cracked, sun-faded vinyl seat of his 1970 John Deere tractor. The metal was so hot it burned through his thick denim jeans. He turned the ignition key. The engine coughed violently, a harsh, metallic rattle echoing across the empty, dusty field. A thick cloud of putrid black smoke burped from the rusty exhaust stack, and then the machine died completely with a sickening clank of seized pistons. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and utterly defeated. Walter let out a long, ragged sigh, wiping a stream of dirty sweat from his eyes. He climbed down stiffly, his heavy work boots hitting the dry earth with a dull thud. He opened the rusted metal toolbox strapped to the tractor's fender and pulled out a heavy steel wrench. He popped the dented green hood, staring hopelessly at the tangled mess of cracked rubber hoses, frayed electrical wires, and grease-caked engine blocks. His hands, shaking slightly from age, dehydration, and sheer exhaustion, reached deep into the boiling hot engine bay to tighten a loose fuel line. But he couldn't grip it. The wrench slipped off the stripped bolt, skinning his swollen knuckles hard against the boiling hot cast iron of the engine block. Walter stumbled backward, dropping the wrench into the dirt, gripping his bleeding hand. His breath came in shallow, painful gasps. He leaned against the massive rear tire of the dead tractor, sliding down until he hit the dirt. A brand new shiny silver Ford pickup truck rolled slowly down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust, and stopped right by the rotting wooden fence line. The tinted power window rolled down smoothly. It was Jeb. He had added another 200 acres to his property over the last decade, aggressively buying out failing farms at auction. He looked well-fed, comfortable, and incredibly smug, sitting in the crisp, air-conditioned cab of his expensive truck. Jeb leaned his thick, hairy arm on the windowsill, a cruel, mocking smirk plastered across his face. "Looks like that old green relic finally gave up the ghost, Walter. You want me to call a scrapyard for you? Might get $50 for the iron." Walter didn't answer. He just pulled a grease-stained rag from his back pocket and wrapped it tightly around his bleeding knuckles, refusing to look at the man. Jeb shook his head, spitting a sunflower seed shell out the window, intentionally letting it land on Walter's side of the fence. "Bank manager told me you're 3 months behind on the mortgage. I offered to buy this worthless dirt patch 10 years ago. I gave you a fair price. But no. You had to throw your life savings away on a stray dog that probably ended up in a federal prison or a ditch anyway. You traded your family's legacy for a piece of human trash. Should have kept the bull, old man." Jeb rolled up his tinted window with the push of a button and sped off his heavy tires, intentionally spinning to leave Walter choking in a thick cloud of red dust. Inside the dimly lit kitchen, the air was stifling. Evelyn was opening a dented tin can of baked beans. It was their dinner for the third night in a row. They hadn't eaten fresh meat in months. The metallic tinny smell filled the small, suffocating room. When Walter walked in, his shoulders slumped, smelling of diesel exhaust, dried blood, and absolute crushing defeat. She didn't ask about the tractor. She didn't have to. She just set 2 chipped ceramic bowls on the wooden table and gently pulled the bloody rag from his hand to clean the wound. Walter sat down heavily in his wooden chair, staring at the countertop. The foreclosure letters from the bank were piling up like a death sentence. The red ink screaming final notice seemed to multiply every single month. The farm was actively dying, and as Walter stared blankly into his cold bowl of beans, he felt his own spirit finally breaking. But 1,000 miles away, in the blistering, unforgiving heat of West Texas, a completely different kind of storm was brewing. A colossal yellow caterpillar, Excavatura Euro, weighing over 40 tons a euro, sat in the middle of a massive industrial repair bay. The air inside the shop was incredibly thick, choking the lungs with the toxic smell of ozone, burnt hydraulic fluid, and raw, unadulterated sweat. Bright blue sparks rained down like violent fireworks as a welder worked on a cracked steel boom in the corner. The deafening roar of pneumatic impact tools made it completely impossible to think. Underneath the belly of the massive machine, a 28-year-old man was wrenching a heavy, high-pressure hydraulic line into place. His thick, heavily tattooed biceps bulged under a soot-stained gray t-shirt. His face was streaked with dark, heavy grease, his jaw set like carved granite. His eyes burned with an intensity that terrified the younger mechanics. It was Ethan. He wasn't a starving, fragile teenager digging through the trash anymore. He was a master heavy-duty diesel technician known throughout the West Texas oil fields as the man who could fix anything with an engine. The shop foreman, a grizzled man with a thick beard, walked by kicking the steel tracks of the excavator with his steel-toed boot to get Ethan's attention. "Hey Hayes, you've been under there for 14 hours straight. Go home. The machine ain't going anywhere tonight and the client isn't paying double overtime." Ethan had legally taken Walter's last name the very day he graduated from technical college. He didn't stop cranking the massive torque wrench. "Almost done. Just need to bleed the air out of the main lines." The foreman shook his head in absolute disbelief. "You're gonna kill yourself working like this, kid. You don't drink. You don't go out. You live in a tin can trailer out past the highway. What the hell are you saving all that overtime money for anyway? You trying to buy the moon? Ethan finally slid out from under the machine on a rolling wooden creeper. He wiped his face with a red shop rag, leaving a fresh, dark streak of grease across his sharp jawline. He didn't answer the foreman. Instead, he stood up, wiping his hands, and reached slowly into the chest pocket of his heavy canvas work shirt. His rough, heavily calloused fingers pulled out a small, square object. It was carefully wrapped in 3 layers of thick, clear plastic to protect it from the corrosive grease and acidic sweat of a 100-hour work week. Inside the plastic was a wrinkled, faded $50 bill. For 10 years, Ethan had kept that exact bill directly over his heart. Every single time his muscles screamed in pure agony. Every time he wanted to quit, every time he wanted to sleep for a week, he would reach up and touch that pocket. He remembered the sickening feeling of the heavy work boot kicking him in the ribs in that alleyway. He remembered the smell of the rotting dumpster. And most of all, he remembered the unyielding, powerful grip of an old woman's hand telling him to plant seeds. Ethan had used Walter's $5,000 to finish at the absolute top of his class. He didn't just pass, he dominated. He had moved out to Texas, where the massive oil and construction rigs lived, because that was where the real money was. While other young mechanics blew their hard-earned paychecks at the local bars on Friday nights, drinking away their exhaustion, Ethan lived in a cramped, windowless trailer. He ate cheap ramen noodles and drank tap water. He took every single double-shift holiday and weekend emergency call-out the shop had to offer. When it rained, he worked. When it snowed, he worked. He didn't just want to be a mechanic. He wanted to own the shop. He wanted to own the entire fleet. Ethan carefully tucked the plastic-wrapped bill back into his pocket, right over his heart. He grabbed a heavy pneumatic impact gun, the loud whir clack-clack, echoing violently through the cavernous bay as he drove the final bolt home. He wasn't just fixing broken engines. He was methodically, relentlessly building a massive mechanical empire. Because he knew the clock was ticking. He knew that somewhere in Georgia, an old farmer who had traded his family's legacy for a street kid's future was rapidly running out of time. And Ethan was preparing to settle the debt. By the 15th year, the Hayes farm had crossed the line, from struggling to actively, irreversibly dying. But it was the summer of 2024 that finally broke the camel's back. A historic, merciless heatwave had locked the county in a brutal chokehold. For 42 days straight, the temperature hadn't dropped below 102 degrees Fahrenheit, not even at night. The soil didn't just dry out. It baked into a hardened ash-colored crust that felt like walking on concrete. Deep fissures spiderwebbed across the empty pastures, wide enough to swallow a man's boot. And then the final artery gave out. It was 4:00 p.m. on a blistering Thursday, when the farm's main industrial water pump catastrophically failed. It didn't just stop working. It exploded. The heavy cast iron housing blew apart with a deafening crack that sounded like a shotgun blast, spraying a geyser of rusty water and sheared metal shrapnel across the dry dirt. Within 60 seconds, the pressure dropped to zero. The one lifeline keeping the remaining 10 acres of crops alive was dead. Walter stood there, his boots sinking into the sudden, pathetic puddle of mud, staring at the jagged hole in the metal casing. He felt his chest tighten as if an invisible vice were crushing his lungs. Replacing a commercial deep well pump cost $14,000. He didn't even have $140 left in his checking account. The next morning, Walter walked into the First National Bank in town. He didn't bother wiping the dried mud off his boots. He sat across from Mr. Sterling, a 40-something loan officer who wore a perfectly tailored gray suit and gold-rimmed glasses that caught the sterile fluorescent light of the office. Sterling didn't even offer Walter a cup of coffee. He just stared at his computer monitor, the blue light reflecting coldly off his lenses, typing something with an annoying rhythmic clicking sound. "I need an emergency agricultural extension," Walter said, his voice raspy and dry from the relentless dust. "Just 6 months. Give me time to repair the pump and salvage the late harvest. I have a buyer lined up for November." Sterling didn't look up from his screen. He tapped his polished fingernail against his expensive mahogany desk. "Mr. Hayes, you are currently 7 months delinquent on your primary mortgage. Your credit line was completely exhausted 3 years ago. You have borrowed against the equity of a property that is currently valued at less than half of what you owe. We are no longer extending grace periods." Sterling finally looked up, his face devoid of any human empathy. He slid a thick, heavy file folder across the desk. A stark red stamp on the cover read "Foreclosure pending." "You have exactly 7 days to clear the $32,000 in arrears. If the balance is not paid in full by next Friday at noon, the sheriff will arrive to lock the gates, and the property will be immediately seized and liquidated." Walter felt the air violently leave the room. He was drowning in dirt, and the bank wasn't just refusing to throw him a rope. They were tying a heavy iron anvil to his ankles. By Tuesday of that final, agonizing week, the desperation had become a suffocating physical weight. Walter was sitting on his rotting front porch, staring blankly at the dead yellow fields. A shiny silver Ford pickup truck tore up the long driveway aggressively, kicking up a massive cloud of red dust that blanketed the front yard. It slammed on the brakes right at the porch steps, the tires locking up and sending gravel flying. Jeb climbed out. He had grown much fatter over the years, his stomach pushing hard against his expensive pearl snap shirt. He wasn't smiling this time. He looked entirely predatory, like a vulture circling a dying animal. Jeb walked heavily up the wooden steps, the rotting floorboards groaning under his expensive leather boots. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how Walter was doing. He just reached into his leather vest, pulled out a thick, heavy stack of $100 bills, and slammed it down onto the wooden railing with a loud smack. "There's $15,000 right there," Jeb said, his voice thick with arrogant satisfaction. "Cash. Right now, I'll buy the South 50 acres. It's enough to pay off your arrears and keep the bank off your back for another year." Walter stared at the money. It was a lifeline, but it was a lifeline dipped in poison. The South 50 acres contained the original homestead, where his grandfather had built the very first cabin with his bare hands. Selling it meant cutting the absolute heart out of his family's history. Jeb leaned in, close his breath, smelling of stale black coffee and chewing tobacco. "Face it, Walter, you lost. You threw your life savings away on a worthless street rat who probably overdosed in a gutter 10 years ago. You traded your grandfather's blood for a piece of human garbage. Now take the money before you lose the house too." Walter's jaw clenched. The muscles in his neck pulled tight like thick steel cables. For 21 years he had endured the whispers in town. He had swallowed the mockery. He had silently borne the crushing weight of his decision. But he would not let this arrogant, greedy man stand on his porch and spit on Ethan's memory. Walter stood up. He was 83 years old, but in that specific moment, he possessed the terrifying, unyielding strength of an old bull. He grabbed the thick stack of money, crumpled it in his calloused, scarred fist, and threw it directly into the dirt at Jeb's feet. "Get off my land," Walter growled, his deep voice vibrating with absolute terrifying authority. Jeb's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He kicked the dirt, sending a cloud of dust over the scattered, crumpled $100 bills. "You're a stubborn old fool. Friday noon. Walter, I'll buy this whole damn place from the bank for pennies, and I'll personally tear down this rotting house." Jeb stormed down the steps, climbed into his truck, and sped away, leaving a trail of destruction behind him. Walter had kept his pride, but pride couldn't pay the bank. He had just burned his very last bridge. Thursday night arrived, the night before the end of the world. The farmhouse was completely dark. The county power company had officially cut the electricity 2 days prior due to unpaid bills. Walter sat alone on the edge of the front porch, his legs dangling over the side. The Georgia night was suffocatingly hot and dead silent. Not even the crickets were making a sound. At 83 years old, Walter Hayes was preparing to die a complete and utter failure. He ran his cracked, swollen hands over the smooth, worn wooden porch railing. His grandfather had cut this wood. His father had painted it. And tomorrow at noon, a sheriff's deputy was going to put a heavy steel padlock on the front door, erasing 100 years of Hayes family history from the map forever. Inside the dark kitchen, Evelyn stood by the window, watching her husband's shoulders shake in the moonlight. Walter was crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just the silent, agonizing tears of a man whose spirit had finally been crushed into fine powder. He had sacrificed his family's legacy for a homeless teenager 21 years ago, and this was his devastating, heartbreaking reward. But 1,200 miles away, in the pitch-black hours of the Texas morning, the silence was violently, gloriously shattered. It was 3 o'clock, a.m. The massive corrugated steel doors of the Hayes Industrial Repair Compound rolled up with a deafening screech that tore through the night. Inside, the cavernous, hangar-like bay industrial floodlights snapped on blindingly bright, turning night into day. And there, lined up in perfect militaristic formation, were 30 colossal, heavy-duty service trucks. They were painted a deep, aggressive matte black, the chrome exhaust stacks gleaming under the harsh lights. Standing at the absolute front of the convoy was Ethan. He was 39 years old now. He wore a crisp black tactical work shirt with his name stitched in silver thread over his chest. His arms were corded with thick, dense muscle, his face hardened and scarred by 2 decades of brutal, unforgiving labor. He checked his heavy steel wristwatch. He looked at the 60 master mechanics, standing at strict attention beside their trucks. They were the best in the state of Texas, hand-picked elite and fiercely loyal to the man who had built them up from nothing. And they were waiting for one single command. Ethan didn't shout. He didn't give a long motivational speech. He didn't need to. He simply reached up and keyed the radio clip to his shoulder. "Fire 'em up," Ethan ordered, his voice cold and sharp as a knife. "We're going to Georgia." 30 massive, high-displacement diesel engines roared to life simultaneously, shaking the concrete foundation of the building, rattling the windows of the neighboring warehouses. The harvest was coming. Friday morning, 11:45 a.m. The Georgia sun was already baking the dead fields, a blazing eye staring down at the defeat of Walter Hayes. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the Hayes farmhouse, followed closely by a county sheriff's cruiser with its lights off. Mr. Sterling stepped out carefully, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He carried a heavy leather briefcase in one hand and a heavy-duty steel padlock in the other. Jeb's silver pickup truck was parked right behind them. Jeb leaned against his hood, arms crossed over his large stomach, a sickeningly smug grin plastered across his sweaty face. He was waiting to buy the farm the exact second the padlock clicked shut. Walter stood on the rotting porch holding Evelyn's hand tightly. He was wearing his absolute best Sunday suit, though it was threadbare at the elbows and smelled faintly of mothballs. He was going to lose his farm, but he was going to do it with dignity, standing tall. Sterling walked up the creaking wooden steps, refusing to make eye contact, and slapped the thick foreclosure document down onto the wooden railing. "Sign here, Mr. Hayes," Sterling said, his voice completely devoid of empathy, sounding like a machine reading a script. "The bank is taking immediate possession of the property. You have exactly 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises." Walter stared at the cheap plastic pen Sterling offered him. His hand trembled as he reached for it. 21 years of agonizing struggle, all ending in a single stroke of black ink. He touched the tip of the pen to the paper. Suddenly, the ground began to vibrate. It wasn't a subtle tremor. It was a heavy, rhythmic pounding that rattled the glass in the windows of the old farmhouse and sent dry dust cascading from the porch roof. Sterling frowned, looking up from the paperwork, annoyed by the interruption. Jeb dropped his smug smile, standing up straight, looking nervously down the highway. A deafening mechanical roar ripped through the silent country air. It sounded like a massive freight train had jumped the tracks and was tearing straight through the fields. Coming over the crest of the dirt highway was a massive, aggressive convoy. 30 heavy-duty service trucks painted matte black, moving in perfect, intimidating formation. The lead truck, a colossal, heavily modified Peterbilt wrecker, blew its air horn a euro, a sound so deep and violent it made Sterling physically flinch and drop his pen. The convoy didn't stop on the highway. It violently blockaded the entire road. Trucks swerved off the asphalt aggressively, tearing up the dead grass as they surrounded the entire perimeter of the farmhouse. Dust billowed into the air like a war zone, blocking out the sun. 60 master mechanics stepped out, slamming their heavy steel doors in absolute terrifying unison. "What is the meaning of this?" Sterling shrieked, clutching his leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. He spun around to the sheriff's deputy. "Arrest them. They're trespassing on bank property." The deputy took one long look at the 60 hardened mechanics, their heavy tools, and the impenetrable wall of black steel blocking the exit. He wisely kept his hand far away from his holster and took a slow step backward. The door of the lead Peterbilt hissed open. The heavy air brakes released with a loud, aggressive psh. Ethan stepped out. He didn't look like a scared, starving 18-year-old anymore. He looked like a man who owned the entire world. His heavy work boots crushed the dry dirt as he walked purposefully toward the porch, the crowd of mechanics parting silently to let him through. "Hey, you can't be here," Sterling yelled, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I am a representative of the First National Bank and this property is under foreclosure." Ethan completely ignored him. He walked right past the trembling banker, right past the terrified sheriff's deputy, and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Walter stared at the towering man in front of him. His old, tired eyes searched the man's hardened, severely scarred face, and then he saw it. Behind the thick, tattooed muscles and the intimidating tactical uniform, he saw the terrified, desperate street kid who had offered to fix a carburetor for a loaf of bread. Ethan didn't say a single word. He slowly dropped down onto one knee in the dirt right in front of the 83-year-old farmer, bowing his head in absolute reverence. From his pocket, Ethan pulled out a stunning, highly polished mahogany box. He opened it carefully and held it out. Inside, resting on a bed of rich black velvet, sealed under a thick pane of bulletproof glass, was a wrinkled, faded heavily, oil-stained $50 bill. Evelyn gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her hands. Walter's knees buckled and he had to grip the railing to stay standing. "You planted a seed, Mr. Hayes," Ethan said, his deep voice thick with raw, unrestrained emotion. "I'm here to bring you the harvest." Ethan stood up. He finally turned his head to look at Sterling. The banker shrank back against the wall, terrified by the cold, calculating intensity burning in Ethan's eyes. "How much is the debt?" Ethan demanded. Sterling swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. $32,000. Ethan didn't blink. He reached into his tactical vest, pulled out a heavy steel pen and a leather-bound checkbook. He wrote a check for exactly $32,000. He ripped the check from the pad and slapped it directly onto Sterling's chest, forcing the banker to catch it before it fell to the floor. "The debt is paid," Ethan said, his voice echoing across the silent farm. "The bank doesn't own this land. Walter Hayes owns this land. Now get off his property before my trucks tow your sedan into the swamp." Sterling looked at the check. The sight of a fully cleared massive corporate account made his face turn paper white. He scrambled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet, and ran for his car. Jeb didn't wait to be told. The arrogant neighbor jumped into his silver pickup and tore out of the driveway, completely humiliated, kicking up dust in his retreat. It took 21 long, agonizing years, but the harvest had finally come. The moment Sterling's car disappeared down the dirt road, Ethan turned back to the farm. He didn't waste time on long emotional speeches or tearful reunions. He had a job to do. Ethan keyed his shoulder radio. Tear it down, rebuild it all. What happened next was a mechanical hurricane of epic proportions. 60 master mechanics flooded the property. They didn't walk. They moved with military precision. The heavy black service trucks backed up to the rotting barn, the destroyed water pump, and the rusting grain silos. Heavy-duty hydraulic cranes deployed from the truck beds, lifting 1,000-pound engines and steel beams as if they were children's toys. Ethan walked straight to the rusted, broken tractor that had nearly killed Walter's harvest. He didn't just repair it. He grabbed a heavy pneumatic impact gun, the violent whir clack-clack echoing across the empty fields, and completely stripped the machine down to its bare chassis. Within 45 minutes, a brand new high-performance industrial water pump was lowered into the well. The pipes were welded shut with blinding sparks of blue light that rivaled the sun. Fresh, clean water immediately surged through the irrigation lines, soaking the dead, cracked earth for the very first time in 42 days. Across the fence, Jeb stood on his own porch. He wasn't laughing anymore. He watched in absolute terrifying silence as an army of 60 men achieved 3 months of grueling labor in exactly 4 hours. When Ethan briefly glanced over his shoulder toward the fence, Jeb slowly backed away in fear, went inside his house and locked his heavy oak door. By 4:00 p.m., the deafening noise finally stopped. The Hayes farm was completely unrecognizable. The irrigation system was running at maximum pressure, turning the mud back into fertile soil. The barn doors had been realigned and reinforced with heavy steel brackets. And sitting in the absolute center of the yard was Walter's old tractor. It wasn't rusted anymore. Ethan and his crew had dropped in a massive fuel-injected diesel engine. painted the chassis a brilliant, aggressive black, and fitted it with heavy-duty commercial tires. It looked like a beast ready for war. Ethan wiped the grease from his hands with a black shop rag. The smell of fresh paint mixed perfectly with the sharp scent of clean motor oil. He walked up to Walter, who was leaning against the newly reinforced porch railing. The 83-year-old farmer was weeping openly now. The heavy, suffocating weight that had crushed his chest for 21 years was completely gone. Ethan handed Walter a shiny silver key. "She's got a lot more horsepower now, Mr. Hayes," Ethan said, a gentle, respectful smile finally breaking through his hardened face. "You're going to need it for the next harvest." Walter took the key. His swollen, cracked fingers traced the smooth metal. He looked up at the bright blue Georgia sky. He knew with absolute certainty that his grandfather and his son James were looking down, smiling. The farm wasn't just saved. It had been reborn in steel and infinite gratitude. Before the sun set on that historic Friday, Ethan had one last piece of business. He gathered his 60 mechanics around the front porch. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Walter and Evelyn. The $32,000 check had saved the farm, but Ethan wasn't finished paying his debt. He turned to Walter and announced the official creation of the Angus Foundation, an agricultural scholarship fund endowed with an initial $500,000. The $500,000 fund was established specifically to help struggling young farmers in Georgia keep their family land, ensuring that no one would ever have to choose between their grandfather's legacy and helping a starving child. Walter Hayes didn't just save one homeless teenager. He proved a profound universal truth. True legacy is never measured in acres of land or the balance of a bank account. True legacy is measured by the human lives you touch. For 21 years, Walter thought he had buried his family's future when he sold that bull. He thought he was a failure, but he hadn't buried it. He had planted it, and he had planted it in the most fertile soil on earth, the heart of a desperate child who had absolutely nothing left to lose. When the soil of Walter's farm finally dried up and failed him, the seed he had planted in Ethan's heart grew into a massive fortress of steel that protected them both. The greatest harvest isn't what you pull from the dirt. It's the seeds you plant in someone else. If you saw someone starving today, what would you do? Would you fiercely protect what you have, or would you risk it all to plant a seed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible true stories.